Teesta Setalvad is a prominent figure against imperialism and fascist movements in the contemporary India. Starting her career as a journalist, Teesta eventually stepped into protecting civil rights of the oppressed. She is presently serving as the Secretary of Citizens for Justice and Peace, an organization formed in favor of Gujarat riot victims. The perpetual persecution and incarceration by the administrative forces could not put out her fighting spirit. We are honored to welcome dear Teesta ma'am into this auspicious occasion of KLIBF 2023. Welcome ma'am. And the other prominent figure we have here is Srimati Revati Laul. Starting her career as a journalist in NDTV, Revati Laul has eventually turned into a prominent writer of relevant socio-political issues. She has won nationwide applause for her work, Anatomy of Hate, which was a pictorial representation of the Gujarat riots in 2002. KLIBF wholeheartedly welcome Srimati Revati Laul to share her views on relevant issues. Welcome, ma'am. And Shri Venkatesh Ramakrishnan. As a journalist needed no introduction in Kerala, Mr. Venkatesh Ramakrishnan is the member of the media wing of Kerala Legislative Assembly. He specializes in political analysis, including the study of Lok Sabha and Assembly elections for the past 25 years, and also tracks sociological trends, especially in rural India. We would like to proudly welcome Shri Venkatesh Ramakrishnan sir to have the conversation with other two dignitaries. Welcome sir. The stage is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. And welcome to all. Welcome to Teesta, my very old friend, and Revati. Well, I have a small complaint against this program because it's scheduled for an hour, and I think it's too short a time to talk to two people like Teesta and Revati. As I was telling you, Teesta I know for how many years? Donkey's years?
35, 30.
For 35, 40 years. So right from her journalist days.
And yours.
Yeah, and mine, yeah. And of course, Revati and I have not met, but then it's a very fascinating, I mean, of course, I've followed your stories earlier, but this Anatomy of Hate, I think it's a fascinating piece of writing. So I would like to start with the general topic, which is the importance of secular writing and the contemporary challenges. I think it's also a very huge subject, which again, you know, we cannot do justice to that subject in 1 hour. But I will just preface it by saying that just like democracy and politics, secularism is also not in writing about secularism per se. You don't have to write about secularism directly to have a secularist discourse. In fact, both Teesta and Revati have proved it time and again during their journalistic career and again as writers. Teesta started with the Bhiwandi riots, and that's when she directly addressed the issue of secularism and communalism. Revati also covered the communal situation in its very many dimensions, including the 2002 riots. But then, if you look at the body of work that Teesta has done as a writer, I think she has written about the judiciary. She has written about the Gandhi assassination. I think it's phenomenal compilation that she has made on the Gandhi assassination and documents.
It's in Malayalam also. Is there in
Yeah, I know it's in Malayalam. Yeah. And Revati's book has been translated into Malayalam. My dear friend Srijit Divagaran, we used to share a lot of time together when we were in Delhi. It was also released. So I think I'll start with Teesta. Let's talk about the subject per se. How do you see secular writing in contemporary India? Do you face any challenges? Or, of course, everybody knows there are challenges, but then do you think that these challenges can be surmounted? And if so, how?
Thank you, Venkatesh, for that very generous introduction. And hello, everybody, and it's an absolute privilege to be at this venue, and to my colleague and friend Revati as well. You know, it's a very, very important question to approach, not just in terms of the narrow word secular, but in terms of what does a secular reality mean. I think a secular reality means an assumption of diversity, of pluralism, of equality, and of non-discrimination. So it's not the labeling of secularism into secular or pseudo-secular that we should be concerned about. The question we need to ask is, are our writers, are people like us, dealing with issues proportionately to the population that we seek to represent or seek to give voice to? Are we actually talking about diverse histories, diverse realities, diverse experiences in the present, in the immediate past, and in the much earlier past? Because a lot of my work has also been concerned about looking back at the shadows and silences of history telling. And I think that is why I always say that even before December 6, 1992, which was a marker for Indian state and politics, before May 16, 2014, which was another marker for Indian politics, I think even before that, we were a democracy in the making. We had not completely secularized. We were trying to get there with the pulls and pressures of the privileged classes in politics, the subalterns trying to get there, negotiations, not always violent, but happening. And it is in the middle of that process that we see this disruption. And in this disruption, I don't want to be the only one who speaks, I feel today is a difficult time for writers.
Disruption becomes regression.
Yeah, disruption becomes regression is a very good way of putting it. It is a challenge for the writer to speak her mind, to write her mind. I think all of us are watching how we write on social media, let's face it. How we pitch things. We may have pitched things differently in a certain era. Today we pitch it differently. But to say that there are no spaces, I think, would be also drastic and irresponsible. We would not be sitting here having this discussion, number one. And number two, I think India is thankfully too diverse for it to be completely dominated just yet. The attempt is being made, but I think there are spaces, and those spaces, it is our duty as public intellectuals to expand.
Thank you, Teesta. I think that's very well put. But Revati, we're talking about this general topic, secular writing and the contemporary challenges. And of course, Teesta has made a very strong case saying that there are still spaces. And I think your book, Anatomy of Hate, is a very phenomenal example of that space, how the space can be used. I don't know how many of you are actually familiar with the kind of work that Revati did. It's essentially the story of three people who were involved in the riots in 2002, and she followed them for 14 years. Their life was followed for 14 years, and she kind of accounted, not just their, lives in terms of the riots or in terms of the secular perspective, as we call it, but their everyday lives, the kind of challenges that they went through in their lives. So that's also, following the ordinary lives of these people was also a phenomenal intervention. So from that perspective too, I want you to address this question, secular writing and contemporary challenges.
Thank you so much, Venkatesh and Teesta and all of you for this absolutely fabulous festival and opportunity to talk about a subject like this. Teesta has already sort of opened the door by saying what is, setting the template for what we need to talk about, which is that there are secular spaces. There is space where we can still talk. However, I look at the question in the opposite way, which is, who are we writing for? I think if we have to grab back and increase the amount of secular spaces and the voices, then we have to also look, Trivandrum and Kerala is a space where there is a lot of room for conversations on communal violence, communal thinking, how to resist it, because people here resist it since forever. But if you look at the rest of the country, and also this is creeping up on a state like Trivandrum, I've attended RSS Shakas in Trivandrum. So I think I look at the question from the opposite point of view. Should we be only talking to people who already agree with us? And is it also important for people who are liberal, who question communal pushes and impulses, who question fascist impulses, to talk with people who are fascist, to talk with people who do not think like them? Because the reason that, I've been looking at hate and the politics of hate from the point of view of what is so attractive about it. Why are so many people, why is it grabbing so many eyeballs, not just as readers but as sympathizers? What is it about Hindutva that is so attractive to so many people? Why are we, people who don't agree with that, failing to reach larger and larger numbers of people? And so since my endeavor has been to answer that question, I'm going to look at secularism and its challenges from that point of view. How do you talk to people who are not like you without preaching from a pulpit, without saying, I am better than you and you're an idiot for thinking the way you do, because then that will get their backs up more. So what I've discovered is two things. Firstly, people like us assume that you can't talk to people who are not like us. So we cut them off, we make them more defensive, and then they coalesce together. They group together and in larger and larger numbers. And they find a reason to group together because we give them that reason. So one thing is to open the door to a genuine conversation. But how do you talk to people whose ideas you cannot stand? One way to do that is to understand where those ideas are coming from. Why is it that, let's say, the protagonists of my book, middle class, English speaking, people who had a master's degree, who are from powerful dominant castes, why did people like that take part in mobs to annihilate Muslims? What made that so attractive? If we don't understand it, we can't reverse it. Once we understand that there are many factors at work there, and we start to unpack those layers, then it's possible to get inside those spaces and have a conversation with those kind of people. So once I finished writing The Anatomy of Hate, I then moved to a space where this kind of politics is at its most extreme, in a part of western Uttar Pradesh, in a district called Shamli, because the violence of Shamli and Muzaffarnagar in 2013 allowed that May 6, 2014 to happen. And when we have that door open, we need to spend time talking to people not like ourselves, giving them what they want better than the Sangh Parivar or Hindutva forces, and then learn to take our secular conversations into other spaces and make it expand instead of contracting.
Yeah, I think should come to Shamli and the kind of engineered communal violence in 2013, which ultimately resulted in May 2014. But coming back to the question of spaces, Teesta, I have been fascinated by the amount of work that you do. The point is, you have Communalism Compact, you have Citizens for Justice and Peace, you so much of documentation, you almost single-handedly fought so many cases, including the Naroda case. But in the midst of all that, you kind of documented the Gandhi trial, the entire documentation. I think it's, so what is the kind of perspective that you have when you do something like that, which is not part of your everyday?
Thanks for that question. I just wanted to go back a little bit, because the assumption that it was only 2013 that resulted in somebody coming to power, I think is a very short-sighted view of looking at Indian society and state and politics. Because if you really need to look at what happened, you need to go not just to 2002, but you need to go to 92, 93 Bombay and 1984 Delhi. And which is why some of us say, and we repeat it, not just as political correctness, but as a matter of conviction, that the overall prevalent culture of impunity fostered by the bureaucratic class, whether it's in Kerala or whether it is in Gujarat, you won't imagine the number of Tamilian and Malayali bureaucrats sitting in the government of Gujarat. I'm sorry to raise this issue, but who have actually participated in the complicity post the 2002 violence. So let's talk about some difficult issues. That post 2002, it was the corporate sector's complete makeover of a certain politics. After the first Vibrant Gujarat Summit in 2009, that enabled a lot of things to happen. Shamli and Muzaffarnagar, Baghpat, Meerut was just the final blow, but it was not the reason. I just wanted to put that in perspective. I also want to add, before I come to my work, that I think we need to take out the word secularism from this binary of Hindu and Muslim. And that is what my only little issue with Revati is, that I think we need to talk about the issue of secularism from a point of view of the vast section of Indians who might be Muslims or who are also Adivasis, Muslims who are also Gujars, Muslims who are also migrant workers, Muslims who are also agriculturists, small and large, and Muslims who are also big crony capitalists. So I think we need to look at this whole issue a little bit outside the traditional way secularism has been looked at. And that is what some of us have been attempting, not me alone, because we really feel that this multi-sectorality of identity is what is eventually going to be a resistance to this politics, not the Hindu-Muslim binary. Because one monochromatic identity cannot be. So at some point we'll need to examine, for instance, how come, and Venkatesh is witness to that as much as I was, I remember his exemplary writing for the front line, that post 1985-86, we saw on the one hand very, very shrill majoritarian politics put a stranglehold on Indian society and state. I was just recalling yesterday or day before to a very young journalist, that some of you need to know the historiography of communal mobilization, not just communal violence, but communal mobilization. Because if you do not understand that the yatra, not this yatra, that yatra which started at Somnath and ended up with the first Kar Seva and the firing, we know which yatra that was, we know who flagged it off. That yatra was a bloody yatra. Everywhere it went, you could read Sunday Observer, you can read Telegraph, you can read Hindustan Times, Frontline at that time. And you see that everywhere it went, it dotted the country with pre or post violence, which was targeted violence against one section, because that yatra was about discriminatory citizenship. It was not about just the Hindu-Muslim. It's a way of saying that yes, what we could not get in 1950, what we could not get in 1947, though an Islamic Pakistan was created, we will get now. The first declaration of intent was the slaying of Mahatma Gandhi. And the second big, huge declaration was on 6th December. And then we see the continuum. So I think we need to look at the secularism issue outside, and that is what I've attempted to do in my engagement and in my work, not just in my documentation. Today, apart from Secretary for Citizen Justice and Peace, I'm Vice President of the All India Union for Forest Working People.
Yeah,
58,000 members.
I would like to listen about the work that went into the Gandhi book.
The book, the Gandhi book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in fact, what we did, Javed Anand and I together edited Communalism Combat, a print magazine from 1993 till 2012. Now it's an online portal called sabrangindia.in. One of the issues that we brought out in 2004 was around the official papers around Gandhi's assassination. In that, we also examined through Marathi literatures the whole, it was NDA-1 government just before 2004 that had tried to glamorize Godse through plays and theatre. And that issue is a pretty seminal issue of combat. And we had a few documents there about the government resolution after Gandhiji's assassination, Sardar Patel's letter, which we had accessed from the government archive. So when my publishers approached me to say that expand that further into this anthology, and that is what Beyond Doubt and Anatomy into Gandhi's Assassination, the entire compilation which I've edited is about. It's a tribute to my mentor as a journalist, Marathi journalist Jagan Fadnis, through whom I first learned in 1997-98. He had brought out a tiny book, Mahatmanchi Akhir, matlab the last days of the Mahatma. And for the first time, I heard, living in Mumbai, being a Gujarati Maharashtrian, that there were 5 attempts on Gandhi's life before the one that killed him. How many people in this audience know that?
Yeah, it's a very important question actually.
And that out of the 5 attempts, in 3 previous attempts, Godse was important. So it was not a spontaneous act, it was premeditated, it was well considered, and this entire hype created behind it being spontaneous because of partition, etc., is actually hyperbole by the right wing.
Yeah, I think, that's an important story that I wanted Teesta to talk about because, looking at Gandhi from amidst all this, I think it's very important. I think it's important for a state like Kerala also to look into Gandhi rather more closely than what we have been looking at so far. Coming back to one point that Teesta raised, basically this going beyond binaries, I think Revati's book does that in a very nuanced manner. Like, for example, the protagonist that you're talking about, Pranav, the educated person, he starts working with an NGO, which is, of course, obviously a secular NGO, and then he discovers that, that there are Muslim contractors who are also trying to make a fast buck out of the contributions that were coming to the riot victims. So, of course, you have done it in a very nuanced manner, but then I think, there are larger issues that we need to address. Of course, I know about the work that you're doing in Shamli, but that's also very direct in the sense, it's completely related to the 2013 situation that developed there and the aftermath of that. So how do you go forward from here?
So thanks for that, Teesta and Venkatesh. Actually, it's absolutely true. Communalism and secularism and aspects of secularism are not binaries. And that is also some of the work inspired by people like Teesta and also the long-standing writing of people like you, Venkatesh, that we have been working in. It's a very small fledgling organization that we started on the back of the book that I wrote, The Anatomy of Hate, because I discovered in that, and also not just me, but the people I work with, that caste, tribe, in the part of Uttar Pradesh we work, it's mostly caste, is very complex. And if you look at each caste, people's identities are complex. They're made up of so many different parts, gender, caste. And so when we are addressing issues of the fissures, the 3 big fissures that I describe and also teach are what India is based on. It's gender, caste and religion. And so we work at the interface of these. What we do is we try and identify castes that are moving towards ideas of majoritarianism in some way, and we identify what is a particular caste, and in that caste, in that particular village, what is it that they don't have that makes these ideas of communalism and of majoritarianism attractive. And we try, and sometimes it's very small things. For instance, in the area that I work in Western Uttar Pradesh, there are middling castes, OBC castes, which are competing with each other, principally Jats and Kashyaps. And the Kashyaps want the same thing as Jats, but they're working as daily wage labor on the land owned by Jats. And the Jats are communal, so the Kashyaps say that, okay, we have a small bully here, the Jats. How do we combat them? If we ally with the big Hindutva forces, then it squashes the small bully. So how do we work to overturn that? We try and say that if you form a collective in your village that is composed not just of your caste, but of many castes, of Dalit castes, of other OBC castes, even of castes like the Jats who you consider to be your enemies, then you become more powerful than if you were to ally only with Hindutvas. But this is all talk. The only way to actually demonstrate this is to walk that talk on the ground and say, do some of the things that we've tried. is to say, okay, in 2 years of COVID, what is it that you need most? The health system there is broken. So what we've done is we petitioned the government as a collective of across 64 villages. We got people together to sign and ask the government for free health camps until the local primary and health centers and sub-centers could be set up again. Now, Kerala had a really great track record during COVID with a fantastic health minister who unfortunately was not reappointed. But I'm saying that, what happened in a place like Western UP is the health system was completely broken. People were dying in their homes. So what we said is, let people collect together across different castes and communities and see that the strength of that collective can force the government to set up health camps. The government didn't have staff to set up those health camps. They, in turn, forced private hospitals to do this. Then we use this to say, look, this is the power of a collective. We're showing you the power of a collective. Now do you still believe that the power of a collective is better, or the power of one singular identity on the other side is better? Even then, it takes time for people to believe in a cynical world, especially in a place where everything is broken, where the justice system is broken, where the police system is mostly reliant on thuggery and bullies. It's very hard to make people have faith again. But when you do this, you demonstrate what a collective can do. That's what we're doing in Shamli. You can Google us, we're the Sarfaroshi Foundation. So it's built, all of this came from this one big question I had. How do you talk to people unlike yourselves? If we are going to really want to expand liberal ideas, we have to talk to people who are not liberal. Our audience can't be just us. Our audience has got to be people who don't think like us. And it's got to not be talking down. It's got to be understanding where that space comes from. It's got to be, as Teesta very rightly pointed out, nuanced and layered.
And beyond the binaries. I think, we should talk about this experiment a little more later. When Teesta talked about, the milestones and said that these milestones are not just the things that took us to where we are now. Not Gandhi's assassination, not December 6, 1992, not May 2014. I remember something because I have been covering Ayodhya since 1986, and I have had the occasion to interact with many of these leading Sangh Parivar activists. So I'll recount one interesting anecdote. Many people in Kerala know about it because I've written about it in Malayalam, but I'm writing it for the first time in English in the Marxist, in the next issue in the Marxist. Yeah. So this is an interesting story because, in 1992, this whole build-up was there. I've been covering Ayodhya since 86. I have seen how Ayodhya, the town was captured bit by bit. In fact, Ramachandra Paramhans, who was the leader of the Ayodhya Ram Janmabhoomi agitation at that time, he used to say, "Humne to Sam Dan Bed Dand sab istemal kiya hai. Sama Dana Beda Dandam." എല്ലാം ഉപയോഗിച്ചിട്ടാണ് അയോധ്യ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ നഗരം 86-നും ഇറ്റ് വാസ് ക്യാപ്ചേർഡ് ബിറ്റ്വീൻ 86 and 1992. Then 1992 the demolition took place. But in the very first election that took place after 93 assembly elections, the BJP could not succeed. So I went back to Ramachandra Paramhans and I asked him what happened. So he had very famously said after the demolition of Babri Masjid, when I had gone to meet him 3 days after the demolition, he was playing a game called Bagh Bakri. And he said, in this game, the Bakri can win, but not in real life. The Musliman, the minority Bakri will lose, certainly. But then, when they lost the election, I went and I asked him, what happened? So he said, Kaam jari hai. We had some successes, some failures, some big failures, some minor failures, but hamara kaam jari hai, our work is continuing. So I think, we need to see that in perspective. When you talk about contemporary challenges, they are not just contemporary challenges. And exactly what you said, that, that you need to look at it in a comprehensive manner, not just in terms of milestones. Could you elaborate on this point a bit?
Yeah, in fact, so glad you brought up the town of Ayodhya, because your writing, Sukuma's writing, Anand Patwardhan's amazing work, because he was shooting for Ram Ke Naam. He did not shoot the demolition, he was shooting the build-up. And I just want to mention, I'm sure people here know it, but I keep mentioning, जो काम जारी था उनका, the work which was ongoing was not legit, okay? I want to talk about Mahant Lal Das. Don't forget Mahant Lal Das. He was a priest of Ayodhya, officially appointed as a guardian. He had been given security to look after the fact that let there be a non-partisan religious look overseeing. Suddenly killed. His security lifted 10 days before he was killed. And when the investigation was ordered into his death, the evidence vanished. So no trial took place as to who killed him. Now this kaam jo jari hai, and I would like to say that the forces that were set up pre-independence, that came to be 1905, 1906, 1925, with a design on the state and society as India, as they perceived it. We have to admit that it was a long-term goal, but is it a legitimate goal? Is it a goal which was non-violent? Was it a goal that was open? Was it a goal that was hate-free? I mean, we know Tamas, we know the controversy around Tamas. I mean, these are some things that younger journalists should actually be reading about before they actually go on the field.
I would suggest they should also watch Tamas, go back to Tamas.
Yeah,
and watch.
and that one scene when that young man, Revati, you and I are later players. But the fact that he captures that young man in the shaka who first vomits when he's asked to strangle and kill the cock. And then he slapped and he says, if you don't do this, you can't come to the shaka. And that is part of that training. The militarization and the internalization of violence. And therefore, while we talk in the homilies of, talking to the other side and all, let's not forget that we have to look at what that other side has been doing. And obviously not everybody that has got swayed has gone to the shaka. But we are dealing with something pretty dire. And therefore, we are talking about arming of people, we are talking about militarization of civil society, we are talking about a changing form of the Indian state, which never really got democratized after independence because we did not reform our CRPC, IPC and judiciary even. And while we were about to start talking about that, you have this regression. And now we have an open weaponization of laws and the criminal justice system. The UAPA, the Gundas Act, the PMLA, any number of things, including what the Gujarat Assembly has just passed after UP Assembly passed it, criminalizing protest. So you break 144, which all of us have done when we've protested, and you will have a criminal case against you. Maybe your property, as small as it is, will be impounded. So it's a police raj within a democratic constitutional setup.
Well, I think that's what I said, that when you have somebody like Teesta with us, when you start discussing the CRPC, when you start discussing the laws of this country, you can actually discuss for 3 hours on this very topic, on just this point. I don't know whether any of you are aware that, that there is a law that is being contemplated to link all your properties to Aadhaar.
Yes.
It's being so basically this whole question, looking at these details and nuances are very important for any assembly, for any legislature, people working in the legislature, people who are part of the legislature. It's very important for them to look into the nuances. Anyway, I think we'll have...
and there's one more thing I want to say, is that after the marker of 2014, I think we need to go to the northeastern state of Assam. Because, people say Gujarat, Citizens for Justice and Peace. But today my organization is working way beyond Gujarat. We are working on citizenship in Assam in 19 districts. We are working in East UP. We are working on constitutional education. But if you look at one huge policy marker, it's being experimented with impending stateless list for 22 lakh people out of 3.3 crore population in the state of Assam. And that is an NRC NPR. And the moment you have an all India application of that, even before your Aadhaar and property, this thing, you will create social strife of unimaginable dimensions. Because all of us, including Venkatesh and me, will be looking to see how we save our citizenship.
These are the challenges that, that we need to really focus on. Of course, Teesta will get arrested and come out on bail. That will happen. Let's not discuss that at this point of time because, that will impact her, case also. But the point is the larger challenges, when you talk about contemporary challenges, I think that the larger challenges are very important. And the aspect of Kaam Jari Hai, the long-term project. In fact, Revati's book also comes up with very interesting vignettes of this Kaam Jari Hai, especially through the characters of Suresh and Dungar. Suresh was involved in the same riot which was actually led by Maya Kodnani, who was not exactly a gynecologist. She couldn't differentiate between male fetus and the female fetus. Anyway, but the point is, she got special treatment. She did not get arrested till there was tremendous pressure. So in this calm...
In the Sabarmati Mahila jail where I was, all the jailers and matrons used to tell me how she had a separate barrack and how she was given a full barrack on her own with one person to look after her. But in addition, on 15th August 2022, when Amrit Mahotsav was being observed and Bilkis Banu's convicts were being released, there were 17 women in Ahmedabad's Mahila Sabarmati jail who had been waiting for their mercy petitions to be granted after 14 years, 21 years of incarceration. And those 17 women were upset. They took memoranda, they were almost going to protest, and then they were subdued.
Anyway, coming back to this Kaam Jari Hai and the way you bring it out through the characters, through the personalities of Suresh and Dungar. So, what is your perspective on this aspect?
Of course, we know that this has been a project in the making by Hindutva forces from 1925 onwards. And Teesta rightly pointed out about the 5 attempts on Gandhi, one of which you can read by Ashish Nandi in a journal called Public Culture. It's a fascinating story of one of Gandhi's standby assassins who came out of jail, and he interviewed him and analyzed him. But coming back to Kaam Jari Hai, this is a work in progress for a very long time. We are seeing it manifest and blow up in our faces all over the country. But reverse Kaam bhi jari hai. And it is not facetious to say that we need to work with people unlike ourselves, because how do you change politics on the ground? You change politics by working with people who don't think like you and making them believe that there is reason for them to start thinking like you. If you say, I'm never going to talk to them because they consist of Godse worshippers and assassins, yes, they do. But there's nuancing on that side, and we have to try. Change comes by trying to talk to people, but not just talk. It's not like you sit down and have a conversation with a thug. It's about understanding the larger social and political spaces that people occupy that are not liberal, and understanding how to make them liberal. And it requires a lot of dogged, hard work and painstaking, nuanced research to do that, but it's possible. And we have to believe that it is possible to change. And it is important and imperative that when we're talking about secularism, that it is contingent upon us who are secular to change people back to increase our tribe. That is how the political space changes, and that is how is taraf bhi kaam jari hai.
I just wanted to add one thing to this question, because you were talking about your interesting experiment between the Kashyaps and the Jats, because the caste structure in India, that's also a very phenomenal structure, perhaps something which...
Use another adjective.
Which one?
Don't say phenomenal.
Why?
Well, it's a impenetrable caste structure. Don't say phenomenal, almost like crazy.
Well, I somebody believe that that it is the caste structure of this country which has helped in some resistance, especially in the period between 93 and 99. We'll agree, disagree on that, and we'll debate that in due course. So this 1993 the defeat that the BJP faced in Uttar Pradesh, that was essentially a creation of kind of OBC Dalit association forged by Kanshiram and Mulayam Singh Yadav. Anyway, I think we'll get into the merits and demerits of that in later. But is that a strategy, or is that a perspective that we can pursue to kind of look at this oft-repeated assertion of yours of going beyond the converted?
I think the RSS and the Hindutva forces have increased their tribe by going out there and having conversations with people who originally didn't think like them and then expanding. So therefore the reverse also has got to be true. If expansion requires talking to people who are not like you, then contraction also requires the people who aren't like you to believe in themselves a little more and to be able to find ways to reach out to people who don't think like themselves. Otherwise, we're doomed to contracting and reducing our spaces. We have to not look at the fact that we talk secular talk, but who's listening? Who is listening? Who's consuming? How many people are consuming this? And why is that consumption decreasing? If we don't look at the consumption side, we are not going to change the essential nature of this politics. If you ask yourself why the BJP didn't win in 1993, it's because it took time for the effect of the destruction of the Babri Masjid on 6 December 1992 to really kind of gather more speed on the ground. Indira Gandhi had died in 1984. After that, if you look at regional politics, in Uttar Pradesh, the Congress was decimated. It didn't win a single election after that. And in Gujarat, a similar decimation took place. In many other states, Karnataka, a decimation of the Congress was on its way. The effect of something doesn't happen in the year after, as you know. It takes decades and constant work. So therefore, the reverse work has to come with enough self-belief that we can reverse this and that we must do it by putting feet on the ground and looking at who is consuming these ideas and how can we make more people consume these ideas. A literature festival organized by the State Assembly is a very good initiative. The state should also look at who and how many people who don't think and who don't read Maxim Gorky can also try and read that. Yes, translation has always been a tradition in Kerala, but can people ensure in schools, in small colonies, in places outside the city of Trivandrum, but even in Trivandrum, that people who don't think like you can be gently persuaded to read something that they wouldn't otherwise read. That is the only way to start changing.
Revati, I'll just add one thing here. Of course, Teesta wanted to respond to something. But before that, I just wanted to add something. Revati has been, she has almost concluded every sentence by saying that you need to talk to the other side, not to talk to other people. But I can tell you a very interesting phenomenon as somebody who belongs to Kerala and who has spent most of his life away in North India. An interesting phenomenon that I am seeing now in Kerala over the last 15 years, there is growing drawing room acceptance to the Hindutva and Hindutva sectarianism in Kerala. And perhaps I think, they also know that, they need to keep talking to the other side and there are vulnerabilities. Yeah. So that is something. So, Teesta, go ahead and respond. Yeah.
I think it's a very valid thing that you're saying, and I think, I've always loved Kerala because Kerala has always given me a lot of space, but I don't want to glamorize Kerala, and I keep saying that you think you're an oasis, but you're not. And the forces have been, you had the largest number of shakhas than in any state, not now, 10 years ago, more, and the South poses a demographic, political-cultural challenge to Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan narrative, but I think let's not underestimate the powers of majoritarianism. I want to mention one more thing here, is that, we have not touched upon this, and I think my work has got very enriched because of the perspective of, say, my partner, Javed Anand, because he in 1990 2 years before the demolition, and I'm going back to that act, kept writing and writing regularly about how minority communalism will and always feed majority communalism, though majority communalism will, of course, have a design on the state which minority communalism cannot have. Now, he wrote this like 2 years before, urging the Babri Masjid Action Committee not to make it a religious issue and to leave it to secular India and to the constitution, if at all it exists, to deal with it. It didn't happen, and we saw the result. Now, in connection with that, I want to say the demolition takes place, and the first week, you will be witness to this, for first week or 10 days, there was horror, there was condemnation, there was outrage. I mean, I remember the Times of India on 7th or 8th, all editions, had an ad by the Nashik Mutt saying, this is not Hinduism, etc. Within 72 to 90 hours, it changed. When temples began attacked in Bangladesh and Pakistan, the whole narrative changed. Even Advani, who was the architect of the bloody yatra, was compelled to say that I didn't expect the demolition, which is all nonsense, but he had to say it. This factor, socio-geographical, historic, of the fact that a religion-based state was born out of the bloody aftermath of partition is something we need to factor in to whatever dialogue we have, whether it's on this side or that side. And it's something we avoid. And which is why some of us who are not concerned about being politically correct do not want to get into mass gatherings and mass meetings, because we will always raise the fact that minority communalism has contributed to the middle ground slipping away. And again, I come back to the period of 86 and 92. You had, of course, the locks of the Babri Masjid open. We know who did it. But you also had the passage of the Muslim Men's Protection of Divorce Act, which again was seen as attempts by the Muslim community to get a special law for themselves. And if we are dealing with perception, if we are dealing with this thing, then we need to accept that the role of the religious clergy, the resurrection by the mainstream party of the Muslim Personal Law Board, and retrograde practices, religious identity practices, which have nothing to do with the social, economic, justice rights of Muslims, as the Satchar Committee showed us, has also contributed to this widening divide.
Yeah, this is a multi-layered struggle. If you're talking about challenges to secularism, contemporary challenges to secularism, it is multi-layered. We have already made it very clear that it is not just contemporary. It is not dependent on milestones. It's not 1948 January. It is not December 6, 1992. It is not May 2014. It is a kind of process which we need to address at multiple layers. What Teesta is saying is very important. If you leave out one layer, if you are just doing real politics and looking at votes, you will make up with a Muslim organization, say for instance, a prominent organization, Muslim organization in Kerala called Samasta, is apparently moving towards the left now. And I'm told that there are bridges being built between Samasta, but in the Samasta stages, if a girl, Muslim girl, comes with even if she's wearing a headscarf, even then she's not allowed to come to the stage because girls are not supposed to be on the stages. So what is the kind of cultural exchange that is taking place between the secular space and the so-called fundamentalist space? That's a very important question. And of course, I have to add one small glad news, because the organizers have said that we can have another 15 minutes to our time. So I want to bring in a very important aspect of this whole idea of secular writing or secular communication and contemporary challenges, and that is the social media. In fact, social media. In fact, Teesta is actually somebody who has been a permanent target in social media since the time the Sangh Parivar discovered social media. I remember in 1996, when Pramod Mahajan first started these telephone calls by Atal Bihari Vajpayee to your telephone, there were people who said that this is not going to make much of an impact. But Pramod and I used to interact a lot. So he used to say that, you watch, this is going to be the future. And by the end of the 1990s, they had a 3-shift social media factory in Dahod. You know how many people were working there? 9,000 people were working 3 shifts. And they were creating all these social media, trolls, social media handles. And of course, Teesta is somebody, I think Revati must have had her share of the social media trolling after. So I think, this also needs to be addressed. When we say multi-layered, the challenges. So I'll start with Teesta. Teesta, how does one look at this, again, phenomenon and social media phenomenon?
I'm so glad you brought it up because I wanted to and I overlooked it. You see, the question is, social media gives us spaces and I think you have to link up the social media question with the abdication of the corporate media. So I think we have to look at this kind of a dichotomy that we are facing in India today. I don't call it mainstream media anymore, I say corporate media. Because I did this 3-part interview with Sainath over 2 years in 2014, 2015. And he did a brilliant dissection of the class. And I think class is a very important dimension of Indian society also, Revati. We can't abandon it. That in 2009, you had 52% of Indian parliamentarians who were crorpatis. And by 2014, you had 83%. And in 2019, it's gone up further. So now these crorpatis who are sitting in parliament and many in our state assemblies are telecom company owners, mining owners, and television company owners. So the stranglehold on parliamentary democracy is near complete. Within that, we all find spaces in the social media to agitate, to write, to mobilize. But, I've been engaged in a very interesting experiment internationally, trying to put Facebook in the dock. Because, we think when we write something radical on Facebook, that it's wonderful, we are reaching the other side, Revati. But actually, the algorithm designed by the corporate structure is limiting your reach and my reach just to the like-minded community. So this brings me back to my original point, that we are seeing a complete cohesion between the far social religious right and the far economic right. So it's a corporatization of the state, corporatization of the media, and within that, how can you see a revival of people's democracy? And that is a huge challenge. And of course, the hate is obvious. Some people break through it momentarily and brilliantly because they have huge following. And I think that's important to also note that our young leaders, even one is in jail today for over 2 years, Omar Khalid, or somebody like Jignesh, or Kanaiya, have broken that, Shaila Rashid, have broken that barrier also. They've gotten across to much larger people. And therefore, social media is important. But I think, first of all, the money and capital and organization that the other side has put into it, like you said, from 1996, 7, 8, whatever, is amazing, because who else has the foresight? Who else has that vision that we want to capture people's imagination? We want to capture people's way of thinking. And people don't even realize they're being captured, because now with your WhatsApp family groups, regardless of what dear Ravish Kumar, our friend, tells us on Godi Media, we are still looking at those WhatsApps. We are still forwarding them, because we are all victim of that entire operation. So I think we need to also have a systematic examination in our movement-related work to how we can make social media accountable.
When you say movement, it also means the assembly. It also means the employees union at the assembly. It also means the students who have come here. When you say movement, it means all that. Revati, your take on this social media?
I actually am a very small player and have not been trolled, almost not at all. It's probably luck, or just that I'm doing very little as compared to what people like Teesta or you have been doing. So it's not on such a large scale.
Let me just a
But
point of order.
Yeah.
Since you're in the assembly, I think you do great subversive work. So that's why you're not getting noticed.
I was just coming to that. I think a film festival long ago in Delhi that I attended had this very famous Iranian filmmaker Samira Makmalbaf at it. And she's made these fantastic films which are very subversive on the Iranian-Afghan border. And she's, as a woman, had an all-male crew and cast, and she was filming with them at a time when Iran had clamped down on freedom of press. And she said, one doesn't have to always catch your nose like this. You can do it like this. You can be subversive. And there's so many young people here. There are also people from the assembly. I think subversiveness has an attraction of its own. I think a combination of working online and offline is a great way to subvert the system. At a literary event a few months ago in Kasauli, I was asked by somebody that you're doing this work in a small district and you're trying to convert people back to secular ideas, but it's so small. I said, yeah, we're working in 14 villages in a district of 320 villages. But I said, small, the idea that small cannot be effective cannot be part of our imagination at a time when a coronavirus, which is something that you can't even see, has decimated the world and forced us to be locked away for 2 years. So we can definitely be subversive and be a scratch in the throat of the beast whenever we want to.
I think it's very valid, but then finally I think I need to ask at least one question on this, and I think I'll use the extended time to ask this question. When you say contemporary challenges, we have talked about the historical factors, we had talked about the Sangh Parivar's Kaam Jari Hai strategy, which has been almost a century old now. From 1922, when the Hindutva treatise was written, we are now and it was written in 22 and published in 23. So we are actually on the anniversary here of the Hindutva treatise as devised by Savarkar. And I know that many people in Kerala know that, along with Srinarayana Guru, Savarkar was somebody who also very actively worked against the caste system in the Hindu structure. So basically, there has been very many nuances to the Kaam Jari Hai of the Hindutva. We need to have a Kaam Jari Hai of our own. But over the last 25, 30 years, there's one area we may devise plans to counter them on social media in terms of ideology. Of course, we are lacking there also. But there is one area where there is the supremacy of the Sangh Parivar is unquestionable. That is in terms of physical attacks, using the instruments of the state and instruments of the organization that they have. And of course, Teesta is somebody who has faced it. I want you to, of course, I know that you would rather not get into the details of the legal dimension, but the physical attacks against you have been a permanent phenomenon over the last 30 years. So could you tell us how?
The physical attacks began post-2002, 5 attacks in Gujarat itself in the first 2.5, 3 years. I lodged FIRs every time. Justice Verma was witness to one when my car was stoned and we were entering Godhra. His car was just in front, Justice Verma, who was chairperson of the National Human Rights Commission. Varanasi, I was attacked when I was conducting a media workshop post-2014 at the Kashi Vidyapit. And the most recent attack was by the Gujarat ATS, when they stormed into my home and completely illegally dragged me away, and I somehow managed to register a complaint at the local police station. So you see, fear, intimidation and violence is key to their politics, which is why, there's no question they are organized, there's no question they have a long-term view, but the fact is, would they succeed without threat, intimidation and violence? And that is something we also need to reiterate, because I still believe that many people, including people in this audience, are quiet in the face of injustice because of a sense of fear. Even sitting in Kerala, people are scared. Not just ED and income tax, but anything, your family, anybody. Because, and I want to narrate one incident which I read in Munje's diary. I don't know if any of you know about B.S. Munje, an ideologue of the RSS. Visited for Italy 10 days, met Benito Mussolini and wrote a diary. And there was one particular part which I quoted in a main article which was later published by Indian Express a few years ago, where he was visiting this little town in Bihar in the post-partition, 46-47 violence, Akbarpur. And there was, partition is also something, by the way, we need to know more about and study deeply. Because Bihar, Punjab and Bengal, I'm giving you a broad sweep view, equally 3 communities were decimated. 3 communities were victims, 3 communities were perpetrators. Nobody was not a perpetrator, nobody was not a victim. In Bihar, it was the Muslims. I'm putting a very broad sweep narrative. So he's coming out of Akbarpur in Bihar, Ishanpur. And just as he's leaving, getting into his jeep or vehicle, a skull-capped old man, wizened man, runs up to him and just touches his feet, Munje. And he said, "Bas, मार काट छोड़ दो, हम मजहब बदल के रह जाएंगे." Just stop the killing. We will convert and live as Hindus. Now, this is documented by Munje himself with a sense of vindication that the climate of fear and intimidation is what we stand for. Now, related to what Bhagwat said 2 days ago, just 2 days ago or 4 days ago. In an interview, please read the interview directly. Don't read Teesta Setalvad's interpretation. In Panjanya or organizer in English. It's available. Where he says that the aggression that Hindus are displaying is justified because of 1,000 years of servitude. Justified and natural, which means that you're accepting a completely manipulated view of Indian history, number one. Then he says Muslims are by nature supremacists, and that is why there's violence. Again, a completely false narrative. And finally, he says we have no problem with Muslims. They can live here as long as they abandon this narrative. And please also leave the LGBTQ people alone. Whether it is Bhagwat's way of to regain supremacy over a prime minister who does not allow him supremacy, but the fact is the narrative has not changed. And that is the only thing I want to say, that while accepting their organization, while accepting the fact we need to talk to the other side, don't ever undermine that they succeed in large measure, at least 30% measure, because of the threat, intimidation, militarization, and violence. Without that, my question to all of you and myself is, would they be this successful?
Revati, perhaps you have not been targeted for physical attacks yet. But then you also...
Actually, I have.
Okay. So basically, you have narrated the threat perception, how it works in your book. You have said that. Yeah. So anyway, I think I'll let Revati talk about it.
No, I have nothing further to add. I completely agree.
No, but the point is, you have how the threat perception has worked. You have brought it in your book.
I think we all innately understand in our gut what fear is, from a gender, caste, and religious perspective. If you've ever had a parent or a father who's put the fear of God in you, you know what fear is. We innately know that the state can magnify that kind of fear to an unimaginable level. We're living in that time. So I would say that when I'm talking about talking, I'm talking about subversion. I'm talking about doing. I'm talking about reversing politics. I'm talking about action on the ground. I'm talking about having found that it can be effective if we try it. But it requires us to not pretend that there's nothing on the other side, and not pretend that that thing is not massive. And it is also understanding how big that is. But in understanding how big that is, we should also not allow it to completely overwhelm us, but we have to walk that line because it is scary. I'm not going to lie and say I'm not scared. Of course I'm scared. And it's important to be scared. If we have to really reckon with the beast, we have to know the beast.
Thank you, Revati. I think those are very important words coming from somebody who has worked so hard, so extensively in Gujarat. So I like your words on that. And when I started this discussion, I was not aware how this will turn out, but I think we have covered fair large amount of ground. And of course, our honorable speaker is here, N.M. Shamsir, who also happens to be an old friend of mine, incidentally. But then, as I was saying, that we covered a lot of ground, but then I think the message is very important. Ultimately, we have two people who can be literally called, they are the medium and medium is the message, both Teesta and Revati. Wonderful having you here, and I think we have been able to convey the message of their work and their life to some extent. I hope so. And of course, let's all go forward. Yeah. In fact, both Teesta's book and Revati's book have been translated, as mentioned earlier. So I just want to iterate it. All of you must read the Gandhi edited work of the compiled. And Foot Soldier. Foot Soldier, of course, it's a totally different kind of book. So Revati's book has also been translated and published. So I kind of request all of you to get the books, read it, and kind of make it part of your everyday life and your activity. Thank you once again, Teesta and Revati, for spending time with us. And thank you, Shamsir, for dropping in. Over to you. Over to the next session. When I got this note, I thought, the people were asking for questions, but that's not how it is. Okay.
I request Sri N. Shamsir, Honorable Speaker, Kerala Legislative Assembly, to give away the mementos and gifts to the guests.